So yes, thank you so much for joining our MnSearch virtual event. I think this might officially be our first full year of virtual events. Started them last April. So thanks for sticking with us. So yes, we have some contact information here. If you ever have any questions, it's board@mnsearch.org. Also, when you have some insights from the amazing Jackie tonight, use hashtag MnSearch so we can all engage with what you find. And on Twitter, we are @MnSearch. Want to give a huge shout out, big thank you to our sponsors. Our two virtual event sponsors are Rocket 55 and Blue Key Media. Please throw it in the chat if you are from one of these companies. Same with, we've got Hook Agency, Click 360, Nordic Click, and Rank Rankers. So again, please throw it in the chat if you're from there, say hello, and we thank you for your ongoing support. And if you would like to see your logo, we see some white space up here, right? Yeah. So we've got some extra space for you. If you're interested in sponsoring MnSearch virtual events, please contact sponsorships at mnsearch.org, or Jason Sem is on. So if Jason, you want to put in your contact info so people can get a hold of you that way, that would be great. Board of directors. So many of our faces you see right here are present today. So all of these events are completely volunteer based. So yes, this is our board, and we are happy to keep hanging out with you every month. So let's talk membership. So these events are free of charge right now. It's our gift to you. But if you are interested in supporting MnSearch, which is a not-for-profit volunteer-based org, we do have some options. So we have individual memberships. It's just $125 a year. You break that down, that's like $12 an event. Plus, when we get back to in person, which, as we all get vaccinated, will be happening soon, hopefully, you can just waltz right in and get free fajitas, beer, wine, seltzers, and you're ready to go. So, if you just want to preemptively rejoice in that, hit us up, get a membership. And info for that is members@mnsearch.org. Also, Micah is here today. Mike, if you want to put in your contact info, he is our memberships director and would be happy to get you set up. All right, so exciting news about our MnSearch Summit. So this June, we are going to be offering our summit completely free. It's 3 days, 3 tracks, all free. So yes, we have 3 channels. We've got SEO, cross-channel, paid. Our keynotes are Brittany Muller, Ross Simmons, and Christy Olson. We actually have the full agenda set up, and we'll be doing like panels, networking. It's going to be awesome. So if someone could throw in the info of how you get set up, sign up today. Just do it. Takes 2 seconds, maybe more like 20 seconds. But we would love to see you, and it's a good opportunity to get to see some of the industry's top minds for free. So we'd love to see you there. Also, new website is coming. So if you are experiencing any issues with the website, we are kind of working through some technical things, but in the next few months, we will be seeing a brand new, MnSearch is basically getting a facelift. So just wanted to call that out, and we'll be sharing more details about that as it comes up. All right, now for the moment you've all been waiting for, we are super excited to introduce Miss Jackie Chu from a small company called Uber. May have heard of it. And she's going to be telling us all about enterprise SEO, 3 key steps at how you can master it. And right before we turn it over to you, Jackie, just want to say, as you have questions come up, please throw them in there's a Q&A section of Zoom. So if you just want to put those in there, we'll spend the last few minutes going over your questions with Jackie. So with that, let's give you a big virtual round of applause, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Abby. And oh my God, that's a really stacked panel for you guys as MnSearch. I'm so excited. And I'm going to give you guys a little bit of warning just because we are in COVID times. Just got the text. My dog is coming back in like 8 minutes, and she's probably going to interrupt this conversation. So just letting you guys know if you see a little like Ewok come up.
Totally get it.
I unfortunately taught her how to play like hide and seek where I hide from her. So she like immediately beelines to find me when I come home. So cool. So my name is Jackie, and today we're going to talk about enterprise SEO. So hi, I'm Jackie. For those of you guys who haven't met me, I'm currently the Global SEO Lead of Intelligence at Uber based in San Francisco. And that's just a really convoluted, verbose way of saying that my team handles the data and reporting projects for the global SEO teams. But prior to that, I was the Senior SEO and ASO Manager at Square. That's the little like swipey, people like to do the swipey card motion company. I was also the SEO and ASO lead at Dropbox, and very briefly SEO consultant for Yahoo magazines, and have also been an SEO manager for many publishing companies. And actually publishing was how I first got into SEO. And I always like to include Bailey. Like I said, you guys are probably going to actually get to meet her because she's likes to come up. It's pretty obnoxious. I always include her just because if you follow me on Twitter, honestly, you're going to see like a lot of her, not a lot of SEO. Her specialty is barking during Zooms, being a living vacuum, spending all of my money. But anyways, so talking a little bit about enterprises, like I said, I'm really lucky to have done SEO at quite a few companies, including like Uber, Square, Dropbox, Yahoo. And so today I'm hopefully going to teach you guys kind of the common threads and themes of our core projects that we work on in these companies. So first off, let's just talk a little bit about differences between small scale SEO versus enterprise SEO. So honestly, enterprise SEO kind of looks a lot like this. I feel like in the enterprise, I do less SEO and more noodling about how to like manipulate people. About 30% of your day is really spent like actually implementing SEO best practices, writing tickets, PRDs, ERDs. Maybe the other 70% of that time, you're just really trying to prep for meetings and think like, how do I get this person to do this thing that I need them to do? I like to refer to this little graph. I feel like my friends, like obviously like SEO just goes over their heads, no idea what I do. Google has actually even like asked sometimes like, hey, you guys buying links? Maybe we buy some links. I think other SEOs think like, oh, just these like, big company SEOs like yell at people on Twitter. And I think yelling at people on Twitter is like part of it, but that's just like a side hustle. But the reality is I really feel like most of the days I'm just in a floating dumpster fire. And I really like this floating effect because I feel like that's a little like special extra something. So the way I like to think about enterprise SEO is it's a lot like car buying. So I think when you're buying cars, you can get cheap, fast, or safe. Choose two. You can have a cheap and fast car, but it's probably not going to be safe. And you can have a fast and safe car, but it's definitely not going to be cheap. And you can kind of think about enterprise SEO in the same way. So I think, when you think about enterprise SEO solutions and projects, people will always talk about MVPs or like what is like, like the like minimum viable product that we can actually like launch to achieve what you're trying to achieve, just to prove that we can even like accomplish this thing or it's going to move the needle. And so those things tend to be like very cheap for Eng. And so that's fast. The other variable you can choose is like, is it easy to update? Can you actually do this by yourself? Is it totally Eng free? Is it like the SEO person completely in charge of their destiny? And the next thing is, and probably the most important thing is this scalable? Is this just, the MVP? Or is this a solution that you can really invest in like for years and years to come? So I think when it comes to enterprise SEO solutions, things can be easy to update and scalable, but they're definitely not going to be cheap. Or they can be cheap and easy to update, but they're just not going to be very scalable. But you know what, as much as I have to joke about it, there are a lot of perks to working enterprise SEO. So pros, you'll never have to build a backlink again. I started in SEO doing local SEO for lawyers. So that was something I found particularly exciting. If you get the resourcing, you can usually win the head terms around your products, right? So the thing I like to tell people is that the difference between enterprise SEO and maybe like doing a lot of local SEO clients is, for us, we're not really trying to like fake the signals. We're just trying to make them more clear. We already kind of have that brand authority and trust that as long as you're working at a company who has like, some kind of like relationship to the entity that you're ranking for, you should be able to rank and win for those terms. And the other last pro is that you have a lot of teams to support you. You have designers, you have content creators. There's a lot of support, which is great. The cons are you really need to align like very many teams, including a design lead, getting legal sign off, working with your copy leads to get internal links to funnel all the backlink equity that you already have. You also need to like honestly kind of start stacking your wins to get the buy-in to get really large resourcing. And I think you also have a lot of teams to compete with for resourcing. So, and the reality is a lot of these teams can actually enact change a little bit faster than SEO can. So these are teams like SEM and paid social, right? Where it's like very clear to people, like you turn the faucet on and you immediately get conversions. But if I were to distill what is like the main goal, like, any enterprise SEO, enterprise SEO really centers around getting buy-in needed to simple, like to scale really simple SEO processes across teams and platforms. So for example, in the enterprise, your site may look like this. This was an actual sitemap that I created of all of the different content management systems that we're using. This is actually the slimmed down version. At one point we had, I think, like 21 or 22 homegrown CMSs. So you can imagine if that, like with the difficulty of having that many services, even doing something like, oh, I want to update metadata, it becomes very challenging. Or something like, I want to have hreflang. Well, then you need to implement hreflang many times through many different systems and many different engineering teams. So it can get really complicated. But despite all of the millions of things that you can prioritize, I really think there are 3 things that can help you have a winning enterprise SEO strategy. So the first one is to figure out how to automate your internal linking. Number 2 is thinking through how you can scale your content strategy. And then the last one is improving your data and analytics to reduce noise and improve observability, because there's a lot going on big sites. So the first one that I think is probably one of the most important things that's often overlooked is internal linking at scale. So while we don't have to be too concerned with off-page signals, these like internal linking signals tend to be very weak initially in the enterprise. And so this is usually one of your biggest opportunities as an enterprise SEO. And I would honestly argue as like any SEO. Internal linking, like I said, it's one of the most critical tasks SEOs fail to prioritize in the enterprise. Because in a small company, you might be doing all the linking yourself, or if you have like, smaller clients, which means like you are this happy cat going into the CMS, you highlight the words you want to anchor, you enter the link, and then you publish. But if you are working on a site that has, millions of pages, that's not super scalable or defendable. It's really easy to, honestly, for authors to just come in and like remove that link. And it honestly happens all the time. So you need to think like, how can you both make the signal big enough so that it matters? Because that's another problem. You want the signal to be very large, right? Like one or two, or even like maybe a few hundred links from the blog is maybe not going to be enough to move the needle. You really need it to be big enough to matter for the signal to actually get picked up in this very large site. So what I've really liked doing is I like building internal linking best practices inside my CMS. So if you're kind of working on like more of like a WordPress or like a blog site, I think everyone's really familiar with Yoast. Something I'm actually really loving lately that I've actually just started using is this rank math SEO tool. You could do really cool things in there, like actually like redirect URLs. It also suggests URLs for you to link to. So I really like this for like smaller sites. And it's also pretty good at suggesting, related like categories. So I really feel like it's good for like more like medium sites that needs a blog solution. And a lot of these really cool features are available with the free version. The cons are, I think the suggestions are not super intuitive. And, the reality is most big companies won't use WordPress because of security concerns. So that leads me to this. So this is actually going to be probably the most realistic implementation in a really large site, is you actually think about structural internal linking opportunities. So this is actually baking all of the internal links throughout your site through things like navigation, breadcrumbs, creating widgets or related articles sections, and then also, of course, things like the footer. This is also very important when you think about things like those little like sublinks that show up inside of your listing. All of those are actually influenced by having a really clear web structure. So the pros are that these are really technically easy to implement. If you talk to your engineering team about like, oh, hey, I want to add something to navigation, or I want to have like links in the footer, or even like breadcrumbs. That's something that's usually they're quite familiar with and that they're already doing. And the other pros is that any effect you do will be obvious. A lot of times people talk about things like, oh, SEO takes so long. But the reality is when you kind of do these large, kind of like more product driven SEO and you put in many links at once, you'll often actually instead see a step function increase in traffic. It's not really going to be this like long, slow growth. And the nice thing too is also if your main thing that you're trying to link to is product pages, it tends to be pretty easy to get the engineering buy-in to add these to things like your navigation and breadcrumbs. I think the cons here is that it's obviously difficult to get for non-product pages, think more like top of funnel content. And it's also, there's really high friction to updating, right? Because you need to work through your engineering team to update the nav unless you have like the ability to edit the nav yourself. There's also no diversification of anchor text too. And if you think about it, like, you just really have this one word inside the nav unless you have a very sophisticated system in which you can like rotate anchor text. And then also, while footers tend to be, I think the thing that we tend to settle on just because, I think engineering will give it to you a little bit easier because it's not in the way and it doesn't really interfere with any design elements. Oftentimes they can be easily stuffed. And so they're actually like devalued sometimes. But here's an example of one of the things that we've actually built at Dropbox. So I can tell you how this worked, and I think how I think would work in like a happy path kind of way. So the way that this worked was, the SEO manager can go in, they can like choose imagery, and they can also like write a little blurb and then enter in like a hyperlink on any like kind of page type they wanted to. What this did was it allowed us to link our kind of core product pages with our more top of funnel content pages. And we found that it was really great for both users and search engines. We saw like a 6-7%, sometimes as high as like 11% lift on the destination pages that were linked to. But we also saw that, in the SaaS world, there are a lot of touch points. It actually helps people convert for those who actually were reading that content. So it's really great from both an SEO perspective and a conversion perspective. The kind of cons of this is that it's highly manual. In a happy world, you would just be able to like run this off of tags, I think, kind of like the way you in a blog, so that the related articles would kind of show up naturally in that way, so that you're not having to manage it. But this is just like one option for how to like integrate like internal linkings at scale on your product pages. This is a example from Square. So one of the challenges we had at Square was, if you think about the Square design aesthetic, if you've ever noticed the products like out in the wild, the point of sale, we tend to like a very, very clean design aesthetic. And so kind of one of the SEO challenges that had happened is we had a lot of issues with cannibalization between the Help Center and our core product pages. Core product pages had like, maybe a few hundred words at most, while the Help Center has a totally different purpose, right? The Help Center has the main goal of case deflection. We don't want people to contact us if there's an easy way for them to help themselves, because there's just not enough heads to help everyone without any kind of self-help. And so the way that we actually figured out how to do this at scale is, luckily, we had this concept of categorization. So we were able to say like, hey, these articles are about point of sale. These articles are about the card reader. These articles about payroll. And we basically had a very simple Google sheet that fed into this, where we're like, okay, every article that is under point of sale, use this anchor text for these little like buttons and link that to the core product marketing page. This had actually a few benefits. One, it was incredibly scalable. If we ever wanted to change the anchor for whatever reason, the SEO person could do it inside of a sheet. It was also great because it was actually pretty much impossible for people to take out. One of the challenges that we had was there were so many authors who were working within the Help Center that if we were to have these in-text links, while they're ideal, oops, sorry guys. While those in-text links, see Bailey, while those text links are ideal, while they're ideal, they were also very fallible, right? So sometimes people would be like, why is this being linked here? And they'll just kind of remove the link. So this was kind of a way for us to create a really clear signal, but then also have it be completely decoupled from like the main page's content. So I think initially it was kind of unpopular, but one of the other awesome things about this was what we saw was that not only did this have an incredible effect, again, on the destination pages, anywhere from like 5 to like 11% increase in traffic. We saw like payroll go from the second page to the first page, which is like a huge word from a SaaS perspective. It also helped to stem the cannibalization issue, but also actually had a really great conversion effect as well. We found that like while most people didn't actually click on this, the people who did converted almost double as often. So it was a really great win from an SEO perspective and from a conversion perspective. Even though I would say it was initially very unpopular, because people were thinking, if they're in the Help Center, if they're in the Help Center, they're definitely already converted. Why would we want to push them to the product marketing page? But we actually found that a lot of people actually like to do their research. So it was a really great one. The last thing we'll talk about is creating your own internal linking tools. So this is another Dropbox example. Again, we had this kind of same issue with Help Centers. It's very classic. You'll notice a lot of these really big websites have a lot of the same issues, right? So the way that this basically worked is, in a spreadsheet, CSV, we would give a specified like anchor text. So maybe like in this case, like we're going to look at share a file. Other times we would be really interested in things like cloud storage. And then we would just basically put like a destination URL. So this was really nice because it was, again, another foolproof way of ensuring links get and actually stay on the page. Getting them is one challenge, and getting them to stay is also another. And it also let us like diversify the anchor text, because when you compare it to what we did at Square, while it was kind of like more of like a sledgehammer approach, it doesn't involve a lot of tweaking on the SEO side. It also meant that you could only use one anchor text across all of your product pages. So this was interesting because we could say things like, we could say like we want to highlight share a file, but we also want to highlight synonyms like file sharing, which will help that keyword, which will help that page rank for all those like variations of that keyword. So it allowed us to have like a large diverse set of anchor text for those links. Cons wise, it was really costly from an edge perspective, and it often needed custom solutions to things like to manage things like translations and localizations. In this implementation, there isn't as much of this like automated approach. In Square, we could say like, okay, this is how you say point of sale in these different languages. And this approach, you would actually need to show each anchor text in each language as its own individual anchor. So again, this is just like a higher cost, but then allows for higher customization as well. So again, this is basically how it worked. If you're wondering, you upload the CSV. We say like, what is the word we want to hyperlink? What is the destination URL? We'd submit it and then would update all of the links. And so if I were to have any tips for building your own internal linking tool, there are a few key like principles to keep in mind. So one, you don't want to override existing links. There's going to already be like natural links in the text. So if any part of a keyword is highlighted, you want to make sure to ask engineering to implement rules to not override that link. The next one is you want to make sure that you are actually limiting how many times you also implement that link. If you're saying I want to highlight point of sale, you don't want every single one of those mentions to be highlighted. You actually really just want like one, like more than that is probably not necessary. And also plan for localization. Make sure that non-English links can also be hyperlinked to. So next one is scaling your content strategy. So, the nice thing is when we work at smaller companies, you and the managing editor probably over some beers and over like the course of several wins can be really great friends, sharing a beer or two. And the pros with this is, or one of the challenges when you work in the enterprise is that you're actually going to be working with a lot of managing, with a managing editor and freelancers instead. So what ends up actually happening is you have a managing editor, they have a like army of freelancers, and you as the SEO a lot of times will never, ever meet these freelancers. So there's some pros, which is you can get a lot of content out quickly because you have more heads. And in general, if you're ever trying to fight for resources and you can't get a full-time employee, it's honestly usually a lot easier to get some kind of contractor or agency as well, especially big companies. So the kind of cons is it can be kind of slow working with freelancers. A lot of times they still need to interview internal stakeholders. They're not like in your systems as much. So it can be kind of like a slow process. And it can be a little bit harder to incorporate your SEO best practices because you're dealing with this like constant kind of churning of freelancers as well, which happens when you have like a large freelancing base. And again, so that means that you might end up having to like reteach these freelancers as well if you ever do have a relationship with them. But these are some of like kind of like a way that I've like started working with freelancers. So I was like, one of the challenges I had at Square was all of my content was done through freelancers. So what I like to do for like more smaller medium companies are these what I call like SEO skeletons, because I was trying to think like, how can I make sure that the content I want is on the page without feeling like I am challenging their editorial voice and I'm still giving them the freedom for the content to sound very natural, but then everything I need is on the page as well. And this was kind of the best solution. It was the best way for me to kind of communicate to them what I needed. So what I would do is I would give them SEO skeletons. I would have like a title. I'm like, hey, these are the keywords I want to hit. I would do the H1s, H2s, whatever else was on the page. And then I would let them know, you can add anything you want to this. You cannot remove anything I've added. What this does is it gives them a little bit of a framework so that they're actually like, no matter what they write on the page, it has to be relevant to this like content you've dictated, but they can still be authentic to their own voice. And so I really like this for smaller medium companies because it's fairly low touch for the SEO. It's a few, maybe like 10, 15 minutes of keyword research for the SEO person, but it usually gets you what you need. So the cons is that, of course, it still requires you or another SEO to create the template, which depending on how much pieces of content you need is not ideal. So for a lot of content, one of the things I actually really like is using this tool called Clearscope. So from a cost perspective, it's like the very low couple of thousands a month, probably only like 1,000 or 2,000, which is actually very low for a enterprise tool. And one of the things I really love about this is basically what they do is they do a search for a keyword. You say like, I want to rank for best travel credit cards. It will go to Google. It will scrape all those pages that rank for best travel credit cards. And it'll basically kind of give you a framework with how to rank for this keyword. It lemmatizes those keywords. It extracts all of the keywords within the ranking pages. And then it also is able to tell you like semantically relevant keywords. So things like if you want to rank for best travel credit cards, if you look to the right, then you also need to mention American Express, annual fees, best travel credit cards, sorry, bonus points, car rental, card issuer, card offers, etc. So as far as like this goes, I really like it too, because it also there's like a gamification aspect. They give you even like a content grade too. So the nice thing is you can actually literally just like choose the keywords and then give this to your authors to start building their content inside of this. And then they'll know if they're kind of like hitting the score for them to rank. And the nice thing is that you really only need to choose the head term. You don't need to choose all the supporting words. The only con here I will say is that you do need to be a little careful of cannibalization. Sometimes they do suggest you posting like duplicative content. It also doesn't have a concept of what you already rank for. So sometimes it will suggest keywords that are synonyms. So just keep that in mind. And also the other kind of con is because things aren't bolded around, the legal and managing editor might not know what is the actual SEO keyword you're targeting. But overall, I found this a really great way to actually like scale your content strategy. And I found that the content actually tends to rank very well. The last thing I want to talk about is alerting and observability. Because the reality is big companies are really messy. Like I said, a lot of times I feel like a floating dumpster fire, trying to create a little bit of calm in the noise. If you're wondering like how messy, this was a real example of stuff that had happened like 1 week and one of the big companies I work with. All the home pages globally got de-indexed. All of our English homepage traffic also canonicalized to the United States. So pretty much our EN, AU, New Zealand, our number 2 homepage, our number 2 conversion page after the homepage, the CTA actually broke. So people were not even able to like sign up on it. And then hreflang went down kind of the ways I like to keep some calm in that chaos. And my internet connection is unstable. And so here are some common alerting issues in tech that solves them. So one of the common issues I find in really big sites when they start bringing in the SEO team is issues with cannibalization. So taking, for example, this image on the right, we're looking at rebelsystems.com, like we're saying how many times do they say point of sale? So about 2,700 pages. And this is something that's really common for like companies to get into, especially like a smaller company that doesn't have a really robust SEO team. A lot of times, they'll have like one win from an SEO perspective, and they'll keep building pages that are like almost nearly identical to the page they already have. And so what ends up happening is a lot of times I'm actually cleaning up pages when I first come into a website. A lot, you can kind of think about it as like, your site has a rank on your head terms with the leaner, smaller site that have all of these like pages out there in the world with Google crawling and thinking that they're low quality. And this cannibalization is actually a really big issue in like most of the companies I've worked in, if not all. For smaller companies, I honestly really like SEOMonitor. SEOMonitor is a pretty cheap keyword tracking tool. I really like them. They have a Search Console integration. They actually have a cannibalization alert built in. If you guys can see this little like screenshot right here, it tells you that the landing page has changed. So I really like it. I think it's awesome. It's a good lazy way to like monitor this problem. I think the UI though is not super scalable, and it's probably it's kind of like Stat if you guys have ever used it. It's just not as like end user friendly. For bigger companies, one of the things you can do is when you're looking at your head terms or any of like your keywords that you're tracking, just look for instances in which your top ranking URL for keyword is flip-flopping. So this example is like pretty much a square where like, okay, we notice some days we rank really high for point of sale. And then other days, another URL would show up retop is a really good example of like a really good sign to you that you're experiencing cannibalization issues. So the nice pros about this is that it doesn't require extra tooling. Cons is that of course it requires you to actually be digging into each of these to look at the top ranking URL. You can also try this Ahrefs tutorial. Ahrefs has this pretty cool tool that they have this pretty cool tutorial that shows you like how to import your top ranking URLs, but then also look at what pages have multiple URLs ranking for the same keyword. So this is a really good example. The only kind of con here is you kind of have to sift through this yourself. So again, it's a little bit manual, but I really like it from like a macro cannibalization view. Another thing that really helps with observability in really big sites is to actually break up your site into page types, geos, or categories. So I actually like to do both. So I usually have one kind of dimension that's actual page type, just because if you think about it, there's a million pages, there's just like no way that you could ever look at all those pages by themselves. And honestly, it's probably not really in your best interest to do that. So the first thing I do is I look at page types. So I'll have, maybe homepage, product pages, sign up pages, blog. This is also a good way to actually site maps as well, so that you can understand, what part of your site is actually having problems being indexed, what is the rate of which they're being indexed. And then I'll also have an additional layer, an additional dimension, where I'm actually just Canada. Because oftentimes too have like different behaviors as well. And the reason why you want to do this is because most of your issues are actually going to be happening at the template level. They're not happening at the individual page level. This will also, again, make it a lot easier to generate and understand your sitemaps. And it'll help you understand too, which particular page template is having problems. Like we were just talking about Core Web Vitals, tracking this by page type probably makes the most sense. And so one of the challenges here, like the main challenge is your site will have to have a concept of what kind of page it is. Sometimes that's easier said than done. But just as an FYI, this is actually something you can and should also be doing with Search Console, adding, both like any of your top level subfolders. You can actually get really granular. One of the things that people don't realize is that you can get super granular with Search Console. Some people have like several hundreds of properties in there for just one site. And the reason why you want to do that, like you could even go like 2, 3, 4, 5 folders down, is because you can actually increase the amount of data that comes back to you through Search Console if you start happening at the subfolder level. This is actually also really helpful when you're downloading data from Search Console, then to actually make requests at the folder levels. And a lot of people too will, if they get really crazy too, they'll do like what's called like an alphabet filter. They'll make requests by like everything that starts with A, everything that starts with B. You can get really crazy with Search Console data, but out of the box, this is definitely one of the easiest things to do. Make sure you're adding your subfolders and any like important categories to you. It might take a little bit while for that data to flow in. Like it takes a little bit longer, sometimes like months even, but you can actually increase the fidelity of this data by doing that. And then the last thing that I'm really obsessed with is SEO Radar. So SEO Radar is not too expensive. It's about $129 a month, but it's actually awesome because one of the things that it does is you basically give it a URL list and it pings those URLs, and you can even like set up proxies if you want to do it like very discreetly. And the nice thing is that it can monitor both content and tech changes. So it monitors very high level things like like obviously like did the page return like a 200, so you can see like if a page like stops responding, but it also looks at things like did the no index change, did the metadata change, and it actually saves those diffs for you so that you can immediately see like where's the problem. So like in this case it's showing me like, okay, the canonical of this URL has changed. This is a really awesome tool for really loud and noisy sites because stuff like this honestly happens all the time. So it really helps you from a observability and learning perspective. So that's it. In summary, I hope you took away some easy tips on how to automate your internal linking, scale your content strategy, and optimize your data and analytics to reduce noise and improve observability on your site. And so the next time you think about enterprise SEOs, just remember, I think a lot of times they're like thinking like, what are they doing? They're looking at their sites. They're so messy. They're just eating snacks. And honestly, the snacks are pretty cool. But the reality is a lot of times we're just trying to survive in this floating dumpster fire. And that's it. And if you guys are interested in following me, you guys can follow me on Twitter on Jackie C. Chu. And thanks.
Thank you so much, Jackie. This was so awesome. We have a couple questions here, so we'll just start with that. We have a question from Cole Storley. Any best tips for getting client dev buy-in?
So I think client and devs, probably I would separate them. So devs, I mean, honestly, like my best tips for working with devs is one, I think you have to show them that you know what you're talking about. And honestly, I think one of the easiest ways to do that is to kind of like show them you're a little techie too. And honestly, if I were to say like my real trick for this that I pull on every engineer and it works 100% of the time is there's always something going wrong with like your crawling and indexing. And so your computer has this thing called terminal, and it's basically just like this, like it's basically like the command center of your computer. It's just like, this very like mono font kind of looking thing. And a lot of engineers work in it. And you can just do something really simple. You just write like curl and like the URL you're looking at, and it actually downloads the HTML on that page. And so that rather than do like view source, I'll just like do something like that. I'll just like show them. And like once they see that you are talking in like in their language and they think, oh, this person's like not an idiot, that honestly gets me like way closer with the engineering team, way faster. That too. And when I work with them, I also honestly, I think one of the mistakes SEOs make is when they get that first project in and you know, they somehow like squeeze something in, the engineer has to do it. They actually, I think, don't have very good follow-up. And most engineers want to have an impact. They want to know, like, you know, when I implement something, like what happened? And I think that if you are honest with them and you like give them that feedback, I often find that you can get a lot more buy-in. And then also understanding what is a bug versus what is a feature. If your content cannot be crawled by Google, that is a bug. They will fix that. If you're asking for this net new navigation for SEO, like, yeah, that's like kind of like different. That's a feature. And so I think if it's a bug too, they're much more likely to prioritize it and they'll think about it in that way. As far as business, honestly, you back everything down into a forecast. Everything comes into a dollar forecast, and then you prioritize. You have to prioritize it. If you give people a laundry list of things you want to do, pretty much never will they'll get like very overwhelmed. And so one of $8 forecast and prioritize it. And another, I think, foolproof tactic is you just show them the competitors are doing it, and that usually like burns a fire too. People want to win.
Jackie, those are awesome tips. And Samantha Steinbring has a similar question. How do you measure estimated impact of your recommendations when trying to get buy-in? I had a similar question too, which is, yeah, like how do you forecast this?
Yeah, so I think there's two different things, right? So there's like a forecast piece, and then there's like measurement, which I think are like kind of two different things. So for forecasting, it kind of depends on what I'm forecasting. If I'm forecasting something that's like just on an individual project level, a lot of times we'll just look at like what we think our expected keyword growth will be. Just being like, okay, based off of, you know, how strong our site is, how strong our competitor site is, we actually think we should be ranking like this high, which would increase our traffic by this much. That's like a very rudimentary forecast, but it is very defendable and believable and somewhat realistic, right? That's not super scalable for like really huge sites. So a lot of times we'll actually use there's an RPAD profit. It's by Facebook, and basically what it does is it looks at your historical trends and it forecasts out like how big do you think you can grow, and then we would give like two bands. We think this is a conservative band, a aggressive band. The problems with that is that your forecast is only as good as your historical data, and so everyone's 2020 data is garbage at this point. So I would. But then as far as measurement goes, it depends on how vigorous your company is. You know, obviously, very simply, you can say things like, oh, like our SEO ranking improved. Usually people don't really care. So usually what we'll do is we'll try to see like, hopefully you have some kind of like page level metrics that are tied into business KPIs. Like, okay, we improved rank for these keywords from like 5 to 2. This increased traffic from SEO this much, which actually generated this many like incremental GBs. If you're very advanced from an, so you can do this in R and Python. So it's not like definitely an like beginner level analytics, but I actually find R to be very approachable in a way that Python is not. And you basically choose two test groups. So one that did not have the interference. You look at your test group that did have an interference. And it basically shows you like the counterfactual, which is like what would have happened if you like had not done anything. And it actually then benchmarks that growth for you. And then it's nice because it feels like a little bit less biased because you're like, look at me, I like plugged it into R, and like, you know, it's if this is like this is real, this is like the actual, this is actually what most SEO A/B testing platforms are built on. It's like the first, like causal impact is the first basis of Distill's ODN, if you ever heard of that, which is like their Optimizely. It's also how Etsy, Pinterest built their A/B testing program as well. So that's like a very advanced way to do it. Causal impact. But there's a lot of information on it, even from the SEO community. So if you Google causal impact SEO, you will know.
Awesome. Thanks, Jackie. Jeff William had a quick question about RPAD profit. What was the Facebook tool that you shared for forecasting? R profit.
I'm writing it down. I like profit. Okay, so profit is the package, and then R was the language I used in RStudio. but also works in Python. Yeah, but you will definitely want to clean your data from 2020 and like bring it down to like a more realistic forecast before you plug it in there. Because if you throw it in there now and you're in an industry that's been impacted by COVID, your graph will look like the forecast is only as good as the historical data.
Speaking of dumpster fire, yeah, 2020 data is totally
a
in
joke,
that
right? Like I remember when COVID was first happening at Dropbox, people were like, do you think we need to redo the forecast? I'm like, why? Do you know how to reforecast in the pandemic?
Yeah, year-over-year data is weird right now. I had a question. When you find instances of cannibalization, what are your next steps in improving that?
Yeah, so I usually look for the page that I either have a vested interest in ranking better or in the one that like converts better. Or like ranks higher. So it kind of goes on a page by page basis. If I'm at the point where I'm actually like sifting through this, it's probably a very important term to us that we really, really need to own. So I'll just basically go off of what converts better and what's ranking higher. There's usually one that tends to rank better. And the other ones are just kind of like leeching off of it. So I basically identify the page that I want it to, the page that I ultimately want to rank. Bring any of the like long tail keywords that I think the other pages like offer to like bulk up that main core page. And then I redirect those pages to that main page.
Okay. So yeah, that's what I was curious about it is if you redirect or what your process is there.
Yeah.
So that's super
Ideally
helpful.
you redirect. Yeah. Sometimes you just have to like 410 them depending on the situation. If you can't redirect them. Yeah. Ideally you redirect.
Okay, cool. That sounds great.
Happy path redirect.
Yes, perfect. Do we have any other questions coming up? I think you've covered everything that we've had. Josh, are you seeing anything that I missed in the chat?
I think I'm seeing a lot of the questions being answered here. I have one question. So we've been talking about like comps just like being destroyed year over year. What sources of kind of new insights or information or baseline, like what have you been doing to like fill in those gaps in your assumptions where year over year or period over period data has kind of been reliable in the past?
All of our data points together. So there's a bit that I think helps a little bit too, which is we actually separate like our non-brand traffic as best as we can, right? It's a little bit fallible. The reality is, unlike paid search, like things are not as, clear as paid search is. But we basically have
they're
like
losing their data too. So
yeah.
we have that to take comfort in.
This is true. This is true. IDFA and all these things are going on. So we do separate out our non-brand traffic, but we actually tend to look at all of our data together. So that includes everything from like, honestly, even SEM traffic, like demands as well. We like monitor that. We also monitor, of course, like the traditional keyword ranking data as well. And so we kind of basically look at those data points together with business KPIs like orders and like, ultimately dollars processed, just because the reality is that, the demand has increased a lot. So we'll just basically say like, hey, we're actually like increasing in search traffic, you can tell, while demand is just dropping. And then the nice thing is that SEM will usually have the same story. Like in almost all cases, they'll have the same story. So we'll just make sure that our story like aligns.
That's great. Thank you. I don't know if we have any other questions, Abby. Have you seen any here?
I didn't, Jackie. This was so awesome. I took a few screenshots. I'm so excited to like rewatch and just test out some of the things that you suggested. So great.
I've got a list.
I have a lot of opinions about Core Web Vitals. I'm so excited to talk about that too.
Totally. Well, I feel like that's something where, boy, we could have a whole other session just for that, right? So, well, I appreciate all the questions that we've had tonight, and I think Jackie, like Abby said, we're going to be reviewing this and taking notes and implementing the things that you've been mentioning here tonight. If you've had a chance to tune in, really appreciate it. And if you have any last minute questions, feel free to put those in here. But if not, I think we'll kind of wind things down a little bit. Really appreciate folks joining here. Jackie, before we depart, is there a place that people can learn more about you, connect with you? Do you have any shameless plugs that you'd like us to promote? Maybe you want to, reboot your beauty fitness affiliate site?
No, I don't. I actually don't. I do not want to reboot. I'm like, I'm so glad I know not everyone has to see my like subpar dancing. No, you can just follow me on Twitter, Jackie C. Chu. I tweet back. So yeah.
Thank you so much for your time and expertise. We really appreciate it. And for everybody who joined, thank you tonight as well. We couldn't do these without you. So have a great night. And thanks for joining another monthly MnSearch event. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, guys, for having me.